AI chat tool for...
There comes a moment in every empath's life when something inside them goes completely silent. Not broken, not angry, just done. Carl Jung discovered this wasn't depression or emotional exhaustion. He called it the final stage of spiritual awakening, and it terrifies everyone who witnesses it. Because when an empath stops caring, they don't become cruel. They become untouchable. And that changes everything. Jung spent decades studying patients who reached this state. What he found challenges everything we think we know about empathy, spirituality, and personal transformation. The moment the empath stops caring isn't the end of their journey. It's the beginning of something far more powerful. And understanding why this happens might be the most important psychological insight you'll ever encounter. Before we understand why empaths stop caring, we need to see what brings them to that edge. Jung documented a consistent pattern across his most sensitive patients. These weren't people who occasionally felt things deeply. These were individuals whose entire nervous system functioned as an emotional receiver for everyone around them. They walked into rooms and immediately absorbed the psychological atmosphere. Family dinners left them exhausted from managing everyone's unspoken tensions. Friendships drained them because they carried both sides of every conflict.
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it, just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44.
Romantic relationships nearly destroyed them because they felt their partner's pain more intensely than their partner did. Jung called these individuals the emotional shock absorbers of their social systems. They didn't just empathize with suffering. They absorbed it, processed it, and somehow transmuted it so others could function. Parents dumped their anxiety onto them. Siblings used them as free therapists. Partners treated them like emotional support animals who existed solely to manage their moods. And here's what made Jung's observation so disturbing. These empaths never complained. They accepted this role as their purpose. They believed their sensitivity was meant to serve others, that their gift obligated them to sacrifice their own peace for everyone else's comfort. They wore their exhaustion like a badge of honor, proof they were good people who cared enough to suffer. The cultural conditioning ran deep. From childhood, they had been praised for being understanding, for making others feel better, for keeping the peace. Every time they suppressed their own needs to accommodate someone else, they received validation. Every time they absorbed someone's anger to prevent conflict, they were told they were mature beyond their years. This positive reinforcement created a pattern of self-abandonment that felt like virtue. But Jung noticed something the empaths themselves couldn't see yet. Behind their compassionate facade, their psyche was keeping records. Every manipulation, every betrayal, every moment someone took advantage of their kindness. The empath's unconscious mind wasn't just absorbing these experiences randomly. It was cataloging patterns with surgical precision. Consider a composite case profile that illustrates this dynamic perfectly. We see this pattern in the narrative of an individual who spent 15 years managing their family's dysfunction. They knew exactly which words would trigger their mother's guilt trips. They understood the precise emotional sequence their father used to avoid accountability. They could predict when siblings would manufacture crises to regain attention. They had mapped every psychological game being played around them with the accuracy of a cartographer charting familiar territory. But here's what Jung found most remarkable. Despite possessing this knowledge, they never weaponized it. Not once. They just kept absorbing, kept caring, kept giving, until something fundamental inside them began to crack. Their consciousness had become a detailed archive of everyone else's patterns, while their own needs remained buried under layers of service and sacrifice. This created what Jung identified as a dangerous psychological split. On the surface, the empath appeared functional, even thriving in their role as caretaker. But beneath that surface, resentment was accumulating like pressure in a sealed container. Not conscious resentment that could be expressed and released, but unconscious resentment that poisoned their sense of self. The breaking point always came from betrayal, not simple disappointment or minor conflict. Profound betrayal from someone the empath had protected, defended, and loved unconditionally. Jung documented this trigger point across dozens of cases, identifying it as the catalyst that forces shadow integration. Let's examine a narrative illustration that demonstrates this pattern. Consider the story of someone who discovered their partner's infidelity after years of managing that partner's emotional instability, depression, and anxiety. Or perhaps the adult child who learned their parent had been speaking cruelly about them behind their back after decades of serving as the family's emotional glue and mediator. Or the friend who discovered devastating lies after years of carrying secrets and providing unconditional support. What made these betrayals so destructive wasn't just the act itself. It was the empath's sudden recognition that they had seen the warning signs all along and ignored them. Their intuition had screamed the truth for months or years, but they had silenced it. They had chosen to believe the best in someone who was showing them exactly who they were. They had betrayed themselves to maintain their fantasy of who others could become. This self-betrayal cut deeper than the external betrayal. The empath realized they had participated in their own exploitation. They had ignored their inner voice, dismissed their gut feelings, and overridden their boundaries to maintain relationships that were destroying them. The anger they felt wasn't just toward the betrayer. It was toward themselves, for allowing it to continue long after they knew better. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. That realization shattered something fundamental. Not their heart, their illusions. Jung called this the withdrawal of projections. The empath had been projecting goodness, potential, and innocence onto people who didn't possess these qualities. They had been seeing not who people were, but who the empath desperately wanted them to be. When those projections finally collapsed, the empath didn't cry or rage or fall apart the way everyone expected. Instead, something far more terrifying happened. They became quiet, unnaturally calm. Their eyes changed, not with tears, but with clarity. The fog lifted, and for the first time in their lives, they saw reality without the distortion of their desperate hope. Jung described this moment as one of the most chilling psychological transformations he had ever witnessed in his clinical practice. The empath stopped performing emotional labor. They stopped managing other people's feelings. They stopped explaining, justifying, or apologizing for their own needs. They didn't announce these changes. They didn't make dramatic declarations. They simply stopped participating in the dysfunctional systems they had been holding together. Family members who had relied on them to mediate conflicts suddenly found themselves having to face each other directly. Partners who had used them as emotional crutches discovered they could no longer provoke the familiar reactions. Friends who had treated them as free therapists encountered boundaries where endless availability used to be. The empath had withdrawn their energy from the emotional economy that depended on their exploitation. And here's what made this transformation so disturbing to others. The empath wasn't angry. Anger would have been familiar, manageable, something others could work with or manipulate. They knew how to handle the empath's anger, because it always dissolved back into forgiveness and resumed caretaking. This wasn't anger. This was complete indifference to the emotional games that used to control them. People around them tried everything to provoke the old responses. They manufactured crises. They played victim. They guilt-tripped and manipulated. But nothing worked. The empath had unplugged from the emotional matrix that once controlled them. They watched these attempts with detached curiosity, like a scientist observing predictable behavior in a laboratory setting. Jung identified this as the integration of the shadow. Every empath carries a shadow self they've been taught to deny. The part of them that's selfish, that prioritizes their own needs, that refuses to save people from themselves. Society had convinced them this shadow was evil, something to be suppressed and overcome. Religious teachings told them selflessness was virtue. Cultural narratives praised endless sacrifice. Family systems rewarded their self-abandonment. But Jung understood that this shadow wasn't evil. It was the empath's survival instinct. It was their psychological immune system trying to protect them from being consumed by others' dysfunction. When the betrayal finally forced them to integrate this shadow, they didn't become cruel. They became complete. The selfish shadow merged with the compassionate light, creating something society had never prepared for. An empath who could feel everything, but chose consciously where to direct that feeling. An empath who saw through manipulation, but no longer felt obligated to pretend they didn't. An empath who loved deeply, but only those who had earned access to that love through reciprocity and respect. This is what Jung meant by the final stage of spiritual awakening, not transcending the ego, but integrating all aspects of the self into conscious choice. The empath had spent their entire life caring for others at their own expense. Now they were learning to care for themselves with the same intensity they had once given away so freely. This wasn't selfishness. This was self-preservation, finally being honored as sacred.
What if you can create your own website by saying, "This is what I want"? With Wix, you can. First up, let's talk about AI color themes. You can get any combos you want, bold and bright, minimal.
The shift in energy was immediate and unmistakable. Where the empath had once radiated warmth indiscriminately, they now emanated something more selective. Not coldness, but consciousness. They no longer leaked emotional energy to anyone who demanded it. Their presence felt different, grounded, impenetrable. They had become what Jung called selectively empathetic. This selectivity looked like boundaries to some and cruelty to others. The empath stopped responding to manipulative texts immediately. They let phone calls from energy vampires go to voicemail. They said no to requests that once would have guilted them into automatic yes. They stopped attending family gatherings that left them emotionally devastated. They ended friendships that had always been one-sided. They walked away from people they had spent years trying to save. But here's what outside observers missed. The empath hadn't stopped caring about these people. They had stopped caring about maintaining relationships that required them to betray themselves. They had stopped caring about being liked by people who had never truly valued them. They had stopped caring about keeping peace in systems built on their silent suffering. The empath finally understood a truth that Jung had tried to teach for decades. You can't love others well until you love yourself first. Not the shallow self-love of narcissism, but the deep self-respect that refuses to participate in your own destruction. This was the foundation that had always been missing from their relationships. In the workplace, this transformation manifested as professional boundaries that shocked colleagues. Consider a composite example based on strictly observed patterns in Jung's later writings. We see this dynamic clearly in workplace scenarios, where the individual who used to absorb everyone's stress and manage office drama simply stopped. They completed their work excellently, but no longer took on others' responsibilities. They attended meetings, but no longer smoothed over conflicts that weren't theirs to fix. They remained pleasant, but impenetrable to the emotional manipulations that used to derail them. Managers who had relied on them to do three people's jobs suddenly faced someone who worked their contracted hours and nothing more. Co-workers who had dumped their problems on them encountered polite redirection to appropriate resources. The office dynamic shifted because the empath had removed themselves from the role of universal emotional dumping ground. Productivity sometimes suffered initially because the system had been designed around their exploitation. In family systems, the changes were even more dramatic. Let's look at a narrative illustration of this pattern. The empath, who had always hosted holidays, mediated feuds, and absorbed everyone's dysfunction, stopped performing these functions. Not with announcements or confrontations, they simply became unavailable for the roles they had been unconsciously assigned since childhood. Parents who had treated them as emotional support discovered boundaries. Siblings who had exploited their generosity encountered limits. Extended family who had taken them for granted faced a version of the empath they didn't recognize. Someone who smiled politely but didn't engage with drama. Someone who loved from a distance rather than drowning in proximity. Someone who said that doesn't work for me without explanation or apology. The family often responded with shock and accusations. How could you be so selfish? What happened to you? You've changed. And the empath, because yes, they had changed. They had finally stopped setting themselves on fire to keep others warm. The most profound shift happened in romantic relationships. Empaths who reached this stage either transformed their partnerships completely or ended them without the usual agony. Partners who had relied on the empath's endless forgiveness suddenly faced accountability. Behaviors that had been tolerated for years were no longer acceptable. The empath stopped explaining why certain things hurt them. They simply removed themselves from situations that violated their peace. Some partners rose to meet this new version of the empath. They recognized they had been taking advantage of someone extraordinary and chose to become worthy of that person. These relationships evolved into something healthier, more balanced, built on mutual respect rather than one-sided emotional labor. The partnership transformed from parent-child dynamics to two sovereign adults choosing each other. Other partners couldn't adapt. They missed the version of the empath who absorbed their dysfunction, managed their emotions, and asked for nothing in return. When they tried old manipulation tactics and found them ineffective, they often left, searching for a new empath to exploit. And the awakened empath let them go without the usual pain, recognizing the departure as protection rather than loss. Jung observed that this indifference caused panic in the empath's social circle. Not because the empath became mean or vindictive, but because their absence revealed how much dysfunction they had been concealing. Family systems that seemed functional fell apart without the empath holding them together. Friendships that seemed deep revealed themselves as parasitic. Workplaces that ran smoothly descended into chaos without the empath's invisible emotional labor. The people who had benefited from the empath's unconscious servitude suddenly understood what they had lost. But by then, the empath had moved beyond caring about their realization. This wasn't revenge. This was sovereignty. The empath had finally learned that their gift wasn't meant to be given to everyone, but protected and shared, only with those who valued it. Jung called this state psychologically invincible, not because nothing could hurt the empath anymore, but because they had integrated their capacity to feel everything with the wisdom to choose their responses. They could still sense others' pain, read emotional atmospheres, and perceive unspoken truths. But these perceptions no longer controlled them. They had become the conscious director of their own empathy, rather than its unconscious slave. This is where Jung's research revealed something beautiful and terrifying. These awakened empaths developed abilities that made them nearly impossible to manipulate. They could identify narcissists within minutes of meeting them. They recognized love bombing, future faking, and gaslighting before these tactics could take root. They sensed inauthentic energy and simply didn't engage with it. Their integrated consciousness functioned as an early warning system that protected them automatically. But they didn't use these abilities destructively. They could have weaponized their psychological insight to destroy everyone who had hurt them. They possessed intimate knowledge of others' vulnerabilities, fears, and weaknesses. Yet they chose not to retaliate. They simply removed toxic people from their lives and moved forward. This restraint came not from weakness, but from genuine disinterest in revenge. Jung was disturbed by this restraint, not because he wanted them to seek revenge, but because he recognized how much power they were choosing not to abuse. These empaths had become psychological masters who understood human nature at levels most people never reach. They could manipulate, control, and devastate if they chose. Instead, they used their power to protect their peace and help others who were ready to grow. This selective application of their gifts created what Jung called the empath's mirror effect. Their mere presence made inauthentic people uncomfortable. Manipulators felt exposed without the empath saying a word. Energy vampires sensed they couldn't feed and moved on to easier targets. Meanwhile, authentic people felt safe around the awakened empath for the first time, recognizing someone who saw them clearly without judgment. The awakened empath became a living filter. Their consciousness automatically repelled dysfunction and attracted growth. They didn't have to actively vet people anymore. Their integrated presence did it naturally. Those who couldn't handle their clarity removed themselves. Those who valued authentic connection moved closer. The empath's social circle transformed completely without deliberate effort. Jung documented how these empaths rebuilt their lives on completely different foundations. They chose careers that honored their sensitivity rather than exploited it. Some became therapists who could hold space without absorbing clients' pain. Others became artists who channeled their perception into creation. Many found work that allowed solitude and autonomy, protecting their energy from constant depletion. They created friend groups based on reciprocity rather than rescue dynamics. Every relationship became a conscious choice rather than an unconscious obligation. They entered romantic relationships as whole people rather than as fixers or saviors. They chose partners who valued their peace as much as they did, who understood that love doesn't require suffering. Everything changed because they had finally learned to value themselves as much as they valued others. Their homes became sanctuaries instead of open hospitals. Their time became precious instead of infinitely available. Their energy became sacred instead of carelessly distributed. They understood that protecting their inner peace wasn't selfish. It was necessary for their survival and essential for their contribution to the world. This is the moment. Stopping caring about others' dysfunction became the moment of finally caring for their own soul. The ultimate act of self-love. Not narcissism or selfishness, but the recognition that their empathy was a gift that deserved protection, boundaries, and conscious direction. They had learned what Jung tried to teach all his patients. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and martyrdom serves no one. Jung understood this transformation as the birth of a sovereign individual, someone who had moved through unconscious empathy, through betrayal and breaking, through shadow integration, and emerged as a conscious chooser of their own reality. They no longer reacted to others' emotional demands. They responded from a place of integrated wholeness. Every action became intentional rather than reactive.
Forget boring classes and busy work. At South Texas Vocational Technical Institute, it's all about...
The empath who stops caring hasn't lost their humanity. They've found their power. They haven't become cold. They've become conscious. They haven't stopped loving. They've learned to love themselves with the same fierce devotion they once gave away indiscriminately. This evolution represents the highest form of psychological development Jung identified in his work. This is why Jung called it the final stage of spiritual awakening. Not because there's nowhere left to grow, but because the empath has finally integrated the fundamental lesson. Their sensitivity is sacred. Their energy is valuable. Their peace is non-negotiable. And anyone who cannot respect these truths has no place in their life. This isn't cruelty. This is clarity. The awakened empath becomes what society desperately needs, but rarely deserves. Someone who can feel deeply without losing themselves. Someone who can love powerfully without enabling dysfunction. Someone who can see clearly without becoming cynical. They are love with boundaries, compassion with wisdom, kindness with strength, empathy with sovereignty. This transformation isn't a loss, it's a victory. Not over others, but over the conditioning that taught empaths their worth came from how much they could sacrifice. The empath who stops caring about maintaining peace in toxic systems has started caring about cultivating peace in their own soul. They've rejected the false narrative that goodness requires suffering and that love demands self-abandonment. If you have reached this stage of indifference to dysfunction, if you recognize yourself in this awakening, comment "I am done" below. Not because you're giving up, but because you're finally choosing yourself. Like this video if Jung's insights resonated with your journey. Subscribe for more explorations of psychological transformation that society doesn't want to acknowledge, but desperately needs to understand. The moment the empath stops, caring isn't the end of their story. It's the beginning of their sovereignty. And that's exactly what the world needs more of. Not empaths who sacrifice themselves endlessly, but empaths who have learned to wield their gifts consciously, powerfully, and selectively. Welcome to your awakening. You've earned this transformation through every moment you suffered in silence, and now you're finally free. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.
Grammarly just got they've introduced some AI tools, and they're way more than just grammar checkers. Right at the very top, you can click on this.
You have been told your entire life that ignoring reality is madness, that only crazy people refuse to accept facts. But Carl Jung discovered something that will flip everything you think you know upside down. For him, ignoring reality was not insanity. It was the highest form of sanity. And the people who mastered this psychological trick did not just change their lives overnight. They literally reshaped the world around them. Most people are trapped in what Jung called a false reality. A reality created by other people's beliefs, other people's limitations, other people's fears. You are living inside a prison built by strangers, and you do not even know it. Jung spent decades studying a specific psychological mechanism that allows certain individuals to override this false reality completely. He called it psychic reality. And when you understand how to use it, you gain access to what Jung described as instant manifestation. This is not about positive thinking. This is not about vision boards or affirmations. This is about understanding a pattern Jung documented throughout his clinical work. Consider a composite case profile based on his observations. A patient who walked into his office broken and defeated. 6 months later, that same person had completely transformed their entire existence by refusing to accept one simple fact about their life. They ignored reality and reality bent to match their inner conviction. Let me show you exactly how this works. But first, you need to understand why everything you have been taught about reality is designed to keep you powerless. Society has trained you to believe that being realistic is a virtue, that accepting your limitations is mature, that facing facts is the adult thing to do. Jung discovered this is a lie, a trauma response disguised as wisdom. When you were young, you believed anything was possible. You lived in your imagination. You created entire worlds in your mind. And then adults told you to stop, to grow up, to be realistic. They punished your inner world and rewarded your compliance with external reality. Jung argued that this is backwards. Your inner world is the real world. The external world you see is just a projection, a shadow cast by the collective unconscious. When you accept external reality as the only reality, you give away your power. You become a passenger in your own life. You let other people's beliefs about what is possible determine what you can achieve. Here is the disturbing truth Jung uncovered in his research. Every limitation you accept as fact was placed there by someone else. Your belief that you are not smart enough, not talented enough, not worthy enough, did not come from you. It came from parents who projected their own failures onto you, teachers who needed you to fit into a system, a society that requires you to stay small so you do not disrupt the collective agreements everyone else is invested in maintaining. You have been gaslit on a mass scale, convinced that the prison you live in is actually reality, that the chains around your potential are just the way things are. Jung called this collective unconsciousness, and the only way to break free is to do something that will make everyone around you uncomfortable. You have to ignore the reality they insist is true. Here is what Jung discovered that made his blood run cold. The brain does not know the difference between a vivid imagination and an external event. Think about the last nightmare you had. You woke up sweating, your heart pounding. Maybe you were shaking. The monster in your dream was not real, but the sweat on your skin was real. The fear in your body was real. Your brain treated that imaginary experience as if it actually happened. This is not a metaphor. This is neuroscience. Your amygdala cannot distinguish between a vivid memory and a vivid imagination. When you imagine something with enough sensory detail, your brain releases the same chemicals it would release if the event were actually happening. Your muscles tense the same way. Your heart rate changes the same way. Your breathing adjusts the same way. Jung called this psychic reality. The psychological fact that your inner experience is just as real to your nervous system as anything happening outside you. When you imagine something with absolute conviction, your brain begins preparing your body to match that reality. It releases hormones. It changes your posture. It alters the way you speak and move. And here is the terrifying part. Other people respond to these unconscious signals. They start treating you the way your brain believes you should be treated. This is not magic. This is psychology. Consider the dynamics Jung observed across numerous clinical cases. Patients who changed their entire lives by refusing to accept external limitations. Let me break down exactly how this psychological mechanism operates. Step 1. Withdrawal of projection. This is the foundation. You must stop believing the world is happening to you. Right now you are projecting your beliefs onto reality and then experiencing those projections as if they are objective facts. Someone treats you badly, and you believe it is because you are not good enough. You fail at something, and you decide you are not capable. These are projections, not facts. Jung taught his patients to recognize when they were projecting their own beliefs onto external events. When you can see your projections clearly, you can withdraw them. You stop letting external circumstances define your internal reality. This is the first step to ignoring reality in the Jungian sense. You are not ignoring what is happening. You are refusing to accept the meaning you have been taught to assign to what is happening. Here is how this works in practice. Someone criticizes you at work. The external event is just words leaving their mouth and entering your ears. Empath.
Imagine being able to build any just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete AI creation platform.
Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. That is the physical reality. Everything else is projection. The meaning you assign to those words. The story you tell yourself about what the criticism means about your worth. The fear you feel about losing your job. All projection. When you withdraw projection, you see the criticism as information. Nothing more. Maybe it is useful information. Maybe it is not. But it does not define you. It does not mean anything about your value as a person. You have separated the external event from the psychological meaning you were trained to attach to it. This is freedom. This is the beginning of psychic sovereignty. Step 2. Active imagination. This is not daydreaming. Jung was very specific about this. Active imagination is a controlled psychological technique where you enter your unconscious with your eyes open. You create a vivid mental image of the reality you want to inhabit, not as a fantasy, as a psychological fact. You see yourself already living in that reality. You feel the emotions you would feel. You hear the conversations you would have. You experience it so completely that your brain cannot tell the difference between the image and actual memory. Jung discovered that when you practice active imagination with enough intensity, something remarkable happens. Your unconscious mind begins treating the imagined reality as if it already exists, and your unconscious controls most of your behavior, the way you walk, the way you speak, the micro-expressions on your face, the decisions you make without thinking. All of this begins to align with the reality you are holding in your imagination. This is where most people fail. They imagine their desired reality for 30 seconds while brushing their teeth and wonder why nothing changes. Active imagination requires commitment. You need to spend real time inhabiting your psychic reality. 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, long enough for your nervous system to start believing it, long enough for the experience to write itself into your body as if it were a memory instead of imagination, and you must engage all your senses. Do not just visualize. Hear the sounds of your new reality. Feel the textures, smell the air, taste the food you would eat. The more sensory detail you include, the more real it becomes to your brain. The more real it becomes to your brain, the more your unconscious starts aligning your behavior with that reality. Step 3. The reality distortion field. This is where it gets dangerous. When you hold a mental image with absolute conviction, you start behaving differently. And when you behave differently, other people respond differently. Jung documented this with his concept of shadow projection. If you project absolute authority, people unconsciously obey. If you project complete confidence, people unconsciously trust you. Not because you are lying, because your brain genuinely believes the reality you are holding, and that belief broadcasts through every cell of your body. This creates what modern psychology calls a self-fulfilling prophecy. But Jung understood it at a deeper level. You are not just predicting the future and making it come true. You are inhabiting a psychic reality so completely that external reality has no choice but to reorganize itself around your inner conviction. People who do not fit your new reality fall away. Opportunities that match your inner state appear. Synchronicities stack up until it looks like magic. Think about someone you know who exudes confidence, not arrogance, true confidence. They walk into a room and people turn toward them. They speak and others listen. They ask for things and receive them. Why? Because their psychic reality is coherent. Their brain believes they deserve respect, so their body broadcasts that belief in 10,000 microsignals other people pick up unconsciously. Posture, tone of voice, eye contact, facial expressions, all of it aligned with the inner reality they hold. You can do the same thing. But here is what Jung warned about: the dangerous side that most people ignore. If you ignore reality too much without a tether, you become psychotic. Jung saw this happen. We can observe this pattern in cases where patients took active imagination too far, where individuals lost touch with physical reality completely, believed they could fly and stepped off buildings, thought they were invincible and destroyed their lives. The difference between a genius and a madman is control. The genius knows they are using psychic reality as a tool. The madman believes psychic reality is the only reality. Jung called this ego inflation. When you identify completely with the reality you are creating, you lose touch with the physical world. You stop paying your bills because you are manifesting abundance. You ignore your health because you are visualizing perfect wellness. You destroy relationships because you are holding an image of unconditional love that no human can provide. This is the shadow side of ignoring reality, and it will destroy you if you do not respect the boundary. The key is integration. You hold your psychic reality with absolute conviction while staying grounded in physical reality. You visualize abundance while also checking your bank account. You imagine perfect health while also going to the doctor. You create an internal reality of unconditional love while also setting boundaries with actual humans. This is the dance. This is what separates transformation from delusion. Let me give you a narrative illustration based on patterns Jung observed. Consider the story of an aspiring artist struggling with repeated failure. This person had talent, but kept getting rejected, kept running out of money, kept hitting walls. Through therapeutic work focused on active imagination, they began spending an hour every day inhabiting the psychic reality of being a successful artist, not hoping to be successful, not wishing to be successful, experiencing the felt sense of already being successful. Within 3 months, everything changed. The patient started carrying themselves differently, started speaking with more authority about their work, started making decisions from a place of abundance instead of scarcity, and people responded. Gallery owners who had ignored them before suddenly took meetings. Collectors who had passed on their work came back asking for pieces. Opportunities appeared out of nowhere, not because the universe was rewarding positive thoughts, because the patient had changed the psychic reality they were broadcasting and external reality reorganized to match. But we also see this dynamic clearly in cases where individuals took it too far. Consider a composite example based on Jung's warnings about inflation. A man decided he was destined to be wealthy. He quit his job, stopped looking for work, sat at home visualizing money. He ended up homeless. Not because manifestation does, not work, because he confused psychic reality with physical reality. He ignored the physical world completely. He did not take action. He just sat in his imagination and expected reality to change without him doing anything. This is the fine line Jung warned about. You use psychic reality to change your internal state. That internal state changes your behavior. Your behavior changes how people respond to you. How people respond to you changes your opportunities. Your opportunities change your external reality. But if you skip the middle steps and just expect reality to shift because you imagined it, you are headed for disaster. Jung identified archetypes that help explain this distinction. The magician archetype represents someone who understands they are working with psychic forces to create change in physical reality. They respect both worlds. They use imagination as a tool, but stay grounded in action. The trickster archetype represents someone who gets lost in the game, who starts believing their own illusions, who thinks they can manipulate reality without consequences. The magician thrives. The trickster crashes. Here is what separates them. The magician knows when to stop imagining and start doing. They use psychic reality to change their state, and then they take massive action from that state. The trickster just keeps imagining, keeps visualizing, keeps waiting for reality to catch up to their fantasy. And it never does, because they are not bridging the gap between inner and outer worlds. The magician understands that psychic reality is the seed, but seeds need soil.
So when I get an order from Hungryroot, it makes me so happy because it's like one less thing that I have to think.
They need water, they need sunlight. Active imagination plants the seed in your unconscious, but you still need to take physical action in physical reality. You still need to show up, make calls, send emails, have conversations, do the work. The difference is, you are doing all of that from a completely different internal state. And that internal state changes everything about how you do it and how people respond. Now let me tell you about the moment Jung called synchronicity. This is the climax, the instant manifestation part of the title, when your inner conviction becomes so strong that the outer world glitches to match it. Jung spent years studying meaningful coincidences, events that seem too perfectly timed to be random. A person thinks of someone they have not spoken to in years, and that person calls 5 minutes later. Someone needs a specific opportunity, and it appears the next day out of nowhere. Jung discovered these are not accidents. They are synchronicities, moments when your psychic reality becomes so coherent, so unwavering, that external reality shifts to a instant part. Not because change happens overnight, but because there is a threshold, a tipping point. You hold your inner reality with enough conviction for long enough, and suddenly everything clicks into place at once. Opportunities stack, doors open, people appear, resources flow. It looks like overnight success, but it was actually weeks or months of internal alignment finally manifesting externally. This is what people who master Jungian manifestation experience. They do not gradually improve. They hit a critical mass of inner conviction, and then reality snaps into alignment all at once. Jung documented this pattern repeatedly in his work. Patients who struggled for months and then had breakthrough weeks where their entire life reorganized, not because they got lucky, because they had built enough psychic momentum that external reality had to catch up. But here is the part everyone misses. You do not ignore the bus coming at you. That is physical reality. You cannot manifest your way out of getting hit by a bus. What you ignore are the limitations people place on you, the social reality that says you are not good enough, not smart enough, not talented enough, not connected enough. Those are projections, not facts. And when you refuse to accept them, when you hold a psychic reality where you already are good enough, reality bends. Let me bring you back to Earth, because this can sound like fantasy if you do not ground it. Jung was not teaching magical thinking. He was teaching psychological sovereignty, the ability to choose which reality you inhabit internally, regardless of what is happening externally. Most people let external circumstances dictate their internal state. Something bad happens, and they feel defeated. Something good happens, and they feel empowered. They are completely reactive. Jung taught the opposite. You choose your internal state first. You decide what reality you are going to inhabit psychologically, and then you let external reality catch up. This does not mean you ignore problems. It means you do not let problems define your sense of what is possible. You acknowledge the physical facts while refusing to accept the psychological limitations. Here is a practical example. You lose your job. Physical fact cannot be ignored. But the meaning you assign to that fact is not fixed. most people would spiral, feel like failures, question their worth, panic about money. That is one psychic reality. Or you could inhabit a different one. You could see losing the job as clearing space for something better. You could feel excited about new possibilities. You could experience it as freedom instead of failure. Same physical reality, completely different psychic reality. And the psychic reality you choose determines what happens next. If you choose the defeated reality, you will show up to interviews desperate and low energy. People will sense it. They will not hire you. Your fear will manifest more situations to be afraid of. If you choose the empowered reality, you will show up differently. You will interview with confidence. You will make bold asks. You will attract opportunities that match your energy. Same external starting point, completely different outcomes. Because you ignored the social reality that says losing your job makes you a failure. This is what Jung meant by ignoring reality. You do not deny facts. You refuse to accept the collective interpretation of those facts as the only possible interpretation. You withdraw your projection of meaning and create your own. And when you do that with enough conviction, external reality reorganizes around your new meaning. The collective unconscious wants you to accept its interpretations, because when you do, you stay predictable, controllable, safe. But when you start creating your own meanings, when you start inhabiting realities that contradict what everyone else believes is possible, you become dangerous. Not dangerous to yourself, dangerous to the system that requires your compliance. This is why most people will fight you when you start doing this. They will call you delusional, unrealistic, living in a fantasy. They are not trying to protect you. They are trying to protect themselves from the discomfort of watching you break free from the prison they still believe is inescapable. Your liberation threatens their justification for staying trapped. If you are ready to reshape your world, subscribe. Because everything I just taught you is only the beginning. The Jungian path goes deeper, darker, more powerful, and if you are willing to walk it, you will discover abilities most people do not even know exist. Here is my question for you. Drop it in the comments. What fact about your life are you ready to ignore? Not the physical reality, the meaning everyone else has assigned to it, the limitation you have been told to accept. What are you ready to stop believing? Because the moment you stop believing it, the moment you inhabit a psychic reality where it is not true, everything changes. Not someday, not gradually. The moment your conviction becomes absolute, reality glitches. And when reality glitches, manifestation is instant. In the alchemist's path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive